In the gleaming conference room of Pinnacle Tech Solutions, a 28-year-old quality assurance manager was about to face the fight of her professional life. What started as a routine Tuesday morning meeting took a shocking turn when she came face-to-face with a CEO who saw her expertise as expendable overhead. Sophia Blossom wasn't your typical corporate employee. For 6 years, she had spent her life building herself from junior analyst to unofficial department head, known for her ability to see disasters before they happened and prevent them with surgical precision. When she encountered Richard Blackstone dismissing her team's comprehensive risk assessment as analysis paralysis, she had no idea she was walking into a corporate execution disguised as efficiency optimization. Sophia fought back with data, predictions, and passionate expertise that would lead to her entire department's elimination within hours. What began as a cost-cutting presentation would become a $3.8 million lesson in the difference between theoretical savings and operational reality. The Seattle tech industry would never be the same after watching preventable disaster unfold exactly as the useless experts had predicted. Sophia and her 11 colleagues were about to prove that some expertise only reveals its true value when it's gone, and sometimes that revelation comes at a price no company can afford to pay. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning air in Seattle carried the scent of rain and possibility when Sophia Blossom arrived at Pinnacle Tech Solutions that Tuesday. She clutched her laptop bag tighter than usual, the weight of her team's comprehensive risk assessment report heavy against her shoulder. 6 months of analysis, documented vulnerabilities, and carefully crafted recommendations sat in that bag, work that might determine whether her quality assurance and risk mitigation department survived the new vision everyone whispered about in the elevators. You ready for this? Jake Morrison's voice carried the measured calm she'd come to rely on over their 3 years working together. His former military bearings showed in the way he stood, relaxed but alert, like someone accustomed to watching for trouble. "Define ready," Sophia replied, managing a weak smile. At 28, she'd spent 6 years building herself up from junior analyst to unofficial department head, but this morning, she felt like that scared Oregon farm girl who'd arrived at Pinnacle with nothing but scholarships and determination. The conference room filled slowly. Sandra Williams entered with her usual, purposeful stride. 15 years of institutional knowledge evident in how she nodded to colleagues across departments. She'd seen 3 CEOs come and go, survived 2 major restructures, and somehow maintained relationships with everyone from maintenance to the C-suite. If Sandra looked worried, Sophia reasoned, everyone should be worried. "Morning, team," Sandra said, settling beside David Chen, who was already hunched over his laptop, fingers dancing across keys with the intensity of someone trying to solve problems before they became disasters. David rarely spoke in meetings, but his security protocols had prevented more breaches than anyone knew. That was the trouble with preventive work. Success looked like nothing happening. Marcus Thompson slipped in just before the meeting started, his recent college graduation still evident in the way he carried himself. Eager but uncertain, ambitious but overwhelmed by the weight of real-world consequences. He'd been spared the worst of the layoff rumors due to his junior status and entry-level salary. But Sophia could see the guilt in his eyes. Survivor's remorse before anyone had officially been sacrificed. The room fell silent when Richard Blackstone entered. Tall, silver-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most employees made in a month. He commanded attention without effort. His smile was practiced, the kind perfected in boardrooms and consultant presentations. Everything about him radiated confidence and authority. "Good morning, Pinnacle family," he began, and Sophia immediately noticed how he made family sound like a business term rather than something warm. "I'm excited to share my vision for our company's future." The presentation that followed was polished, full of buzzwords like synergy, optimization, and lean operations. Blackstone spoke of market pressures, competitive advantages, and the need to, quote, streamline our operations to focus on core value propositions. Each euphemism landed like a small blow. Sophia had heard this language before, during her brief stint at a consulting firm before joining Pinnacle. It was the vocabulary of cost-cutting, the prelude to pain. Now, Blackstone continued, I know change can be challenging, but I want you to think of this as an opportunity. We're going to eliminate redundancies, reduce overhead, and ensure every department directly contributes to our bottom line. Sophia's chest tightened. When he said redundancies, she knew he meant people. When he said overhead, he meant departments like hers. Teams whose value was measured in disasters that didn't happen rather than revenue generated. I'd like to hear from our department heads about their contributions to company growth, Blackstone announced, his gaze sweeping the room. Let's start with quality assurance and risk mitigation. Ms. Blossom, isn't it? The sound of her name in his mouth felt wrong, like he'd already decided her fate and was simply going through the motions. Sophia stood, her legs steadier than she'd expected, and moved to the front of the room. Behind her, she sensed Jake's encouraging presence, Sandra's protective energy, and David's quiet support. Thank you, Mr. Blackstone, she began, opening her laptop. The presentation she'd prepared was thorough, data-driven, filled with charts showing prevented incidents, cost savings from early threat detection, and projections of potential losses without proper risk management protocols. Over the past year, my team has identified and mitigated 17 critical vulnerabilities that could have resulted in system failures, data breaches, or compliance violations, she explained, her voice growing stronger with each technical detail. Our predictive modeling prevented an estimated $2.3 million in potential damages, while our protocols maintain our SOC 2 compliance and client confidence. She watched Blackstone's expression during her presentation. His eyes glazed over during the technical explanations, sharpened during cost discussions, and returned to that practiced smile when she finished. It was the look of someone who'd already made up his mind and was simply waiting for confirmation of his biases. Interesting, he said, the words somehow managing to sound dismissive. But tell me, Ms. Blossom, how do we quantify prevented incidents? How do we know these disasters would have actually occurred without your intervention? It seems like we're paying for protection against hypothetical scenarios. The question hit like a punch to the solar plexus. It was the eternal challenge of preventative work, proving the value of something that didn't happen. Sir, our risk assessment model is based on industry data, historical patterns, and— Yes, I'm sure it's very sophisticated, Blackstone interrupted, his tone carrying the patronizing patience of someone addressing a child. But in my experience, companies often over-engineer solutions to problems that may never materialize. We call it, quote, 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 quote. Around the room, she could see her colleagues' faces. Jake's jaw tightening, Sandra's eyes narrowing, David's hands stilling on his keyboard. They all understood what was happening. With respect, sir, Sophia tried again, risk mitigation isn't theoretical. Last year alone, we prevented a potential breach that would have— Thank you, Ms. Blossom. That's sufficient for now. Blackstone's dismissal was surgical in its precision. I'll be scheduling individual meetings with department heads this week to discuss value propositions in more detail. I appreciate everyone's input today. As the meeting dispersed, Sophia remained frozen at the front of the room, her laptop still open to charts and graphs that suddenly felt meaningless. 6 years of expertise, 6 months of preparation, reduced to, quote, hypothetical scenarios and, quote, quote, analysis paralysis. Jake appeared at her elbow. That was thorough, he said quietly. Thorough, Sophia repeated, the word tasting bitter. He'd already decided before I even started talking. Probably, Jake agreed. His honesty was one of the things she valued most about him, even when it hurt. But that doesn't mean you were wrong. Sandra joined them, her expression grim. I've seen this before. Different CEO, same playbook. They bring in consultants who don't understand the business, cut the departments they can't immediately quantify, then spend twice as much fixing the problems those departments prevented. How long do we have? Sophia asked. If I had to guess? Sandra's voice carried the weight of experience. 2 weeks, maybe 3. He'll want quick wins to show the board he's making, quote, tough decisions. David Chen finally looked up from his laptop, his usual quietness replaced by something sharper. The authentication system has been showing stress fractures for months. Without proper monitoring and maintenance protocols, we're looking at potential cascade failures. Maybe not today, maybe not next week, but soon. And if that happens? Sophia asked, though she already knew the answer. System downtime, data integrity issues, potential security breaches, Jake listed methodically. Client confidence drops, compliance violations, emergency consulting fees that'll cost 10 times what they're saving by eliminating us. But that's hypothetical, Sophia said, Blackstone's words echoing in her mind. Until it isn't, David replied. The four of them stood in the emptying conference room, surrounded by the detritus of corporate optimism. Empty coffee cups, scattered handouts, the lingering scent of expensive cologne, and cheaper fears. Outside the windows, Seattle's skyline stretched toward a gray sky that promised rain. Sophia closed her laptop with a soft click. In that moment, she understood with crystalline clarity that expertise without authority was just expensive opinion. She'd spent 6 years becoming the best at something most people couldn't see the value of. Now she was about to learn whether being right mattered when the people making decisions didn't understand the questions. Individual meetings, she said finally. He wants to see our value propositions. You'll make him understand, Jake said, but his voice carried doubt. Sophia looked around at her team, these brilliant, dedicated people who'd become something like family over the years. They trusted her to protect them, to fight for their work, to make the case for why what they did mattered. The weight of that responsibility settled on her shoulders like a familiar burden. We'll see, she said, though something deep in her chest was already preparing for failure. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall against the conference room windows, and Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that it was an omen of storms to come. The rain had turned into a steady downpour by Thursday morning, when Sophia received the email that would change everything. Meeting with CEO 2 p.m. Conference Room B. No context, no agenda, just a sterile calendar invitation that landed in her inbox like a corporate death warrant. She'd spent the intervening days refining her arguments, gathering testimonials from other departments about her team's contributions, compiling case studies of prevented disasters. If Blackstone wanted value propositions, she'd give him data so compelling he'd have no choice but to recognize their worth. You've got this, Jake said as they shared coffee in the break room that morning. His daughter's drawing of a computer, labeled Daddy's Work in Crayon, was taped to his laptop, a reminder of what was at stake. Just remember, speak his language. ROI, cost-benefit analysis, bottom-line impact. I know, Sophia replied, though her stomach churned with anxiety. She'd practiced her presentation until she could recite it in her sleep, but something in Blackstone's dismissive tone from Tuesday suggested logic might not be enough. At exactly 2 o'clock, Sophia knocked on Conference Room B's door. Blackstone sat alone at the polished table, tablet open, not bothering to look up when she entered. Ms. Blossom, please, sit. His voice carried the practiced efficiency of someone who'd conducted hundreds of these conversations. I'll get straight to the point. I've reviewed your department's metrics, and I'm struggling to see clear value generation. Sophia opened her laptop, ready to launch into her presentation. Sir, if I could show you our quarterly impact analysis. That won't be necessary. Blackstone's interruption was surgical. I've seen the numbers. What I see is a department that consumes significant resources while producing largely intangible results. Prevention is admirable, but it's not measurable ROI. With respect, sir, prevention is exactly what creates ROI. Last quarter alone, our protocols prevented 3 potential security incidents that could have cost. Could have, Blackstone repeated, leaning back in his chair. Hypothetical scenarios, Ms. Blossom. In the business world, we deal in actualities, not possibilities. Sophia felt her carefully constructed arguments crumbling. Sir, Risk management isn't hypothetical. It's statistical probability based on empirical data. When we identify a vulnerability that matches patterns from documented breaches at similar companies, Ms. Blossom, Blackstone's tone sharpened. I appreciate your passion, but I've made my decision. Your department represents exactly the kind of operational bloat that's holding Pinnacle back. Effective immediately will be restructuring, quality assurance, and risk mitigation. The word restructuring hit her like ice water. What does that mean exactly? It means we're eliminating redundancies. Your team of 12 will be reduced to essential personnel only. Marcus Thompson will remain to handle basic compliance requirements. The rest of the positions are being terminated. Sophia's world tilted. 11 people, 11 colleagues, friends, experts in their fields, reduced to budget line items. Sir, you can't run comprehensive risk management with one junior analyst. Marcus is brilliant, but he's been here 8 months. He doesn't have the institutional knowledge, the system architecture understanding. He'll learn, and will supplement with external consultants as needed. Much more cost-effective than maintaining a full department for hypothetical problems. Those problems aren't hypothetical. Sophia's voice rose despite her efforts to stay professional. David Chen documented 17 critical vulnerabilities in our last assessment. Sandra Williams prevented a cascade failure just last month by catching an authentication loop that, enough. Blackstone's patience evaporated. This decision is final. HR will handle the transition details. Your team will be notified this afternoon. Sophia stared at him. This man, who'd never written a line of code, never traced a security breach, never watched a system fail because someone hadn't done the unglamorous work of prevention. You're making a mistake. I'm making a business decision based on operational efficiency. Blackstone's smile returned, cold and practiced. Sometimes tough choices are necessary for company growth. And when those vulnerabilities turn into actual breaches, when systems fail because there's no one left who understands them, then we'll address those issues as they arise. That's called adaptive management. Sophia closed her laptop with hands that somehow remained steady. I hope you're right. I usually am. Jennifer Hayes will coordinate the transition logistics. Thank you for your service to Pinnacle. Dismissed. 6 years of expertise. 6 years of prevented disasters. 6 years of building something valuable. Dismissed with corporate pleasantries and efficiency metrics. An hour later, Sophia sat in her team's shared workspace, watching Jennifer Hayes deliver the news to 11 people whose lives had just been upended by spreadsheet calculations. Jennifer's usually warm demeanor was strained, her voice mechanical as she read from prepared statements about severance packages and transition timelines. Jake took it with military stoicism, his jaw tight but his posture controlled. Sandra's face showed the bitter recognition of someone who'd seen this pattern before. David Chen simply stared at his screen, watching months of security protocols become someone else's problem. The younger team members, bright minds fresh from universities, full of enthusiasm for making systems better, looked shell-shocked. Marcus Thompson sat apart, his survival carrying its own burden. He'd keep his job, but inherit responsibilities designed for 12 people. Sophia could see the guilt warring with relief in his expression. Effective date is end of next week, Jennifer concluded. Please coordinate with your manager, with Sophia, on transition documentation. HR will schedule individual exit interviews. After Jennifer left, the team sat in stunned silence. Finally, Sandra spoke. 23 years I've been in tech. Seen a lot of companies make stupid decisions. But this... She shook her head. This is going to hurt. How long before systems start failing? Asked Maria Santos, one of their newer analysts. Depends, Jake replied. Some vulnerabilities are time bombs. Others need specific triggers, but without continuous monitoring. Without someone who understands the architecture patterns. Weeks, David said quietly. Maybe less. The authentication system's been showing stress indicators. Load balancing protocols need constant adjustment. And the new client integration we've been planning? That's introducing attack vectors nobody's accounting for. Can Marcus handle it? Someone asked. They all looked at the young analyst, who seemed to shrink under their gaze. "I'll try," he said. "But I don't know what I don't know, you know. There's so much institutional knowledge, so many patterns you all see, that I'm still learning." Sophia finally found her voice. "We'll document everything we can. Create handoff guides, emergency protocols. Maybe external consultants can fill some gaps. External consultants who'll charge triple our salaries and take months to understand what we know by instinct," Sandra said bitterly. "It's not about us anymore," Sophia replied, though her chest ached with the loss. "It's about not letting the company fail because of one executive's ignorance." Jake studied her face. "You're thinking like a leader, not someone who just got fired." "Maybe that's the problem," Sophia said. "Maybe I should have been thinking like someone fighting for her job." "Would it have mattered?" David asked. He'd already decided. You could see it in his eyes. Quote. "They spent the rest of the afternoon in a strange limbo, still employed but already ghosts, their expertise suddenly worthless in the eyes of leadership, but desperately needed by the systems they'd spent years protecting. They documented processes, created emergency contacts lists, tried to compress years of knowledge into digestible guides." As evening approached and the office emptied, Sophia looked around at her team, her former team, packing personal items and saving final versions of critical files. Tomorrow they'd start job hunting. Next week they'd be gone. And Pinnacle's systems would be left in the hands of one overwhelmed junior analyst and whatever external help management deemed cost-effective. "Group dinner?" Sandra suggested. "Might be the last time we're all together." "I can't," Jake said. "Emma's got a school play tonight." "But next week? Before everyone scatters?" They made plans they weren't sure they'd keep, exchanged personal contact information, promised to stay in touch. The normal rituals of workplace endings, made strange by the knowledge that they were leaving behind something fragile and important. As Sophia finally packed her own belongings, she found herself thinking about Blackstone's words. Adaptive management. The idea that you could simply react to problems as they arose, without understanding the complex systems that created them. She hoped he was right. But everything she knew about technology, about risk, about the delicate balance of interconnected systems, suggested otherwise. Outside, the rain continued to fall. 2 weeks after the layoffs, Sophia sat in a cramped Starbucks in Capitol Hill, nursing her third coffee of the day and staring at a laptop screen filled with job listings that seemed to mock her expertise. Risk management analyst, entry level. Quality assurance specialist, must have 2+ years experience with proprietary systems we'll train you on. Data analyst, recent graduates encouraged to apply. 6 years of experience distilled into resume bullet points that hiring managers skimmed in 30 seconds. The cruel irony wasn't lost on her. She was overqualified for entry positions and underqualified for senior roles that required industry-specific knowledge she'd never needed at Pinnacle. Her phone buzzed with a text from her brother Tyler. "How's the job hunt? Need help with rent?" The offer stung, though she knew it came from love. Tyler was a sophomore at University of Oregon, living on the scholarship money and part-time job income she'd been supplementing for the past year. Now her own financial foundation was cracking, student loans looming, and she was considering letting him struggle alone rather than admit her own desperation. "Mind if I join you?" Sandra Williams appeared beside the table, her own laptop bag and the slightly shell-shocked expression they all seem to carry these days. "Please," Sophia said, grateful for company that understood the unique frustration of their situation. "Any luck?" 2 interviews scheduled, both for positions that pay 20% less than what we made at Pinnacle. One's in Tacoma, which means relocating or commuting 2 hours daily. Sandra settled into the chair across from her. "You?" Phone screening yesterday went well until they asked why I was leaving Pinnacle. Apparently, department elimination due to cost-cutting translates to maybe she wasn't actually valuable. Sandra's laugh was bitter. "I had a recruiter tell me my experience was too specialized for most companies." Too specialized. As if understanding complex systems deeply was somehow a liability. They worked in companionable silence for a while, the coffee shop's ambient noise providing cover for their mutual anxiety. Around them, Seattle's tech workers grabbed lattes and discussed startups, funding rounds, and feature launches, the optimistic language of an industry that had moved on while they remained stuck in limbo. Heard from anyone else? Sophia asked eventually. Jake got a second interview at a financial services firm. David's thinking about freelance security consulting. Maria took a temporary position at a call center just to pay bills. Sandra's voice carried the weight of watching talented people scatter and settle for less. Lisa's actually considering going back to union organizing. Says maybe it's time to stop playing by corporate rules. Sophia nodded. She'd heard similar stories from other team members. Brilliant minds taking survival jobs, questioning career paths, wondering if their expertise had been an illusion all along. Her laptop chimed with a new email. Preliminary interview feedback, she read aloud. Says I provided thorough technical answers but seemed to lack enthusiasm for their company culture. She looked up at Sandra. I think I'm forgetting how to be optimistic about work. Hard to be enthusiastic when you know how quickly it can disappear, Sandra replied. You start wondering if any of it matters. Across the city, Marcus Thompson was discovering exactly how much it mattered. He'd spent the morning dealing with what Sophia's team would have called a minor anomaly, unusual traffic patterns that could indicate anything from organic growth to the early stages of a coordinated attack. Without David Chen's pattern recognition expertise or Sandra's institutional knowledge, he was flying blind. The official protocol said to escalate to the external security consultant Pinnacle had contracted. But the consultant charged $300 per hour and took 2 days to respond to non-emergency requests. For something that might be nothing, the cost-benefit analysis seemed clear. Marcus logged the anomaly and moved on to the 17 other items on his crisis management list. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 3 floors up, Tom Bradley was having his own uncomfortable realization. The operations manager had supported Blackstone's efficiency measures, seeing them as necessary evolution. But this week's performance metrics were telling a different story. System response times were slower. User complaints had increased 15%. 2 minor outages that would have been prevented or quickly resolved now lasted hours while they waited for consultant availability. Probably just adjustment period, he told himself, repeating Blackstone's words from the last leadership meeting. Growing pains. But Tom had worked with Sophia's team long enough to recognize the early signs of system stress. They'd been the early warning system, catching problems while they were still whispers rather than screams. Now the whispers were growing louder, and he was starting to understand the difference between theoretical cost savings and operational reality. Back at the coffee shop, Sophia was closing her laptop in frustration when Sandra's phone rang. Marcus? Sandra answered, her expression shifting to concern. Slow down. What kind of anomaly? Sophia watched Sandra's face grow grave as she listened. When the call ended, Sandra looked older somehow. That was Marcus. He's seeing unusual network traffic patterns, load balancing issues, and what sounds like probing attempts on the authentication system. Everything David warned about in his final report. What's he doing about it? What he can. But Sophia, he's drowning. One person trying to do the work of 12, with none of the institutional knowledge, none of the pattern recognition. He wanted to know if I thought he should escalate to the external consultant. For anomaly investigation? That's a $1,500 conversation minimum. Which is why he hasn't called them yet. He's trying to handle it himself, hoping it's nothing serious. Sophia felt a familiar chill, the recognition of system vulnerability combined with human helplessness. It was the exact scenario they'd warned about, playing out exactly as predicted. We could advise him, she said carefully. Unofficially. Help him understand what he's seeing. Sandra studied her face. We're not employees anymore, Sophia. We don't owe them anything. We don't owe Blackstone anything. But Marcus? The company, all the people still working there. Sophia's voice carried the weight of ethical complexity. And if systems fail catastrophically, it's not just Pinnacle that suffers. It's client data, partner companies, end users who trust that their information is safe. You're thinking about helping the company that just fired us. I'm thinking about preventing disasters that could hurt people who had nothing to do with Blackstone's decisions. Sandra was quiet for a long moment, watching the rain streak down the coffee shop's windows. You know what's really infuriating? If we prevent these problems, Blackstone will see it as proof he was right. That external consultation is sufficient. That full-time expertise wasn't necessary. And if we don't help, good people suffer for his ignorance. Damned either way. They sat with that uncomfortable truth. Two unemployed experts watching their former workplace stumble toward predictable disaster. Around them, the coffee shop's afternoon crowd shifted from remote workers to students, the rhythm of a city that kept moving regardless of individual crises. What would Jake say? Sandra asked finally. That we should help Marcus because it's the right thing to do, regardless of politics or personal feelings. And David? That systems don't care about human emotions. They'll fail or succeed based on technical decisions, not corporate justice. Sandra smiled sadly. And you know what you want to do, Sophia nodded. I want to help. But I also want to document everything. If we're going to be proven right, we should have evidence. For our own peace of mind, if nothing else. And maybe for legal purposes, if things go really badly. Maybe. Sandra reopened her laptop. All right, let's call Marcus back. But we're consultants now, not employees. Professional advice, documented conversations, and clear boundaries about what we will and won't do for free. As Sophia dialed Marcus's number, she realized she felt more purposeful than she had in 2 weeks. It wasn't just about vindication or proving Blackstone wrong. It was about using expertise responsibly. About maintaining professional integrity, even when institutions failed to value it. But she also couldn't shake the feeling that they were enabling a system designed to exploit their dedication while refusing to compensate it appropriately. The question was whether doing the right thing was worth the personal cost. Outside, Seattle's skyline was shrouded in gray clouds that showed no signs of breaking. A month after the layoffs, Marcus Thompson sat in his car in Pinnacle's parking garage at 2 a.m., hands shaking as he dialed Sophia's number for the 3rd time that week. The building behind him hummed with servers and systems that no longer had adequate human oversight, and the weight of that responsibility was crushing him. Marcus? Sophia's voice was alert despite the hour. What's happening? The authentication system, he said without preamble. It's throwing errors I've never seen before. Cascade failures across 3 client environments. I've been here since 6 this morning trying to contain it, but it's spreading. Are you looking at console logs right now? Yeah, but they're not making sense. There's this pattern of failed requests that looks almost coordinated, like someone's testing boundaries. Sophia was fully awake now. She'd been expecting this call, had prepared for it, but the reality of system failure still sent adrenaline coursing through her veins. Forward me the logs. I'll conference in Jake and David. 20 minutes later, their impromptu crisis team was assembled via video call, 3 unemployed experts staring at screens, while one overwhelmed junior analyst managed a disaster in real time. The irony would have been laughable if the stakes weren't so high. This is definitely probing behavior, David confirmed, his voice carrying the grim satisfaction of being proven right. Classic vulnerability assessment techniques. Someone's mapping your system architecture, looking for weaknesses. But the external security consultant said our firewalls were adequate, Marcus protested. Firewalls protect against known threats, Jake explained. This is reconnaissance for unknown vulnerabilities. The kind of thing our monitoring protocols would have caught weeks ago, when it was just unusual traffic patterns. Amanda Foster, the external consultant Pinnacle, had hired to replace their entire risk management department, appeared on screen looking haggard. She'd been awakened by Marcus's escalation call and was clearly struggling to understand the crisis scope. I'm reviewing the system documentation, she said, but I need more context about the normal operational patterns. The handoff materials are comprehensive but lack the interpretive framework. Translation. She had lists and procedures but no understanding of how the system actually behaved in practice. All the institutional knowledge that Sandra Williams carried in her head, that David Chen understood intuitively, that Sophia's team had developed through years of observation, gone. How long to bring in additional expertise? Sophia asked. My firm has specialists, but emergency consultation rates are significant, and they'd need at least 48 hours to review the architecture before making recommendations. Sophia caught Jake's expression on screen, the controlled anger of a military professional watching preventable disasters unfold due to poor planning. Amanda, with respect, you're talking about 48 hours while active probing is occurring. If this escalates to a full breach, I understand the urgency, but I can't recommend solutions for systems I don't fully understand. The uncomfortable silence that followed was broken by Marcus. The probing just intensified. I'm seeing attempted access across 17 different services. Shut down non-essential systems, David said immediately. Create an emergency perimeter around critical operations. I can walk you through the protocols, but you need to act now. For the next 3 hours, Sophia's team provided unpaid emergency consultation, while Amanda Foster took notes and Pinnacle's systems groaned under coordinated attack. They contained the immediate crisis, but the underlying vulnerabilities remained unaddressed. As dawn broke over Seattle, Tom Bradley arrived at the office to find Marcus still at his desk, surrounded by empty coffee cups and the detritus of an all-night crisis response. The operations manager's confidence in efficiency measures took another significant hit. How bad? Tom asked. Bad enough, Marcus replied. If Sophia and her team hadn't helped, we'd be looking at catastrophic system failure. Multiple client environments compromised, data integrity issues, potential regulatory violations. Tom absorbed this information with growing discomfort. He'd supported Blackstone's decision to eliminate the risk management department, believing that external consultants could provide equivalent coverage at lower cost. But the mathematics were becoming uncomfortable. One night of emergency consultation had cost more than a month of Sophia's team's salaries, and they'd still needed the fired employees to actually solve the problems. Where does this leave us? Vulnerable, Marcus said bluntly. The probing revealed structural weaknesses that need systematic addressing. But Amanda's firm wants $80,000 for a comprehensive security audit, and that's before any actual remediation work. Across town, Sophia sat in her small apartment, exhausted but unable to sleep. She'd just spent the night doing the job she'd been fired from, protecting systems and data for a company that no longer valued her expertise. The moral complexity was staggering. She felt professionally obligated to prevent disasters, but personally resentful of providing free labor to validate Blackstone's poor decisions. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sandra. Heard through my network that 3 other clients are having, quote, unexplained system issues this week. Word's getting out that Pinnacle's security posture has degraded. The reputation damage was beginning. In the tech industry, security failures traveled fast through professional networks. Clients started asking pointed questions about Pinnacle's risk management capabilities. Potential customers looked elsewhere when they learned about recent organizational changes to the quality assurance department. Jennifer Hayes, Pinnacle's HR director, was documenting everything with the careful precision of someone anticipating legal challenges. Her logs showed escalating system issues, increasing consultant costs, and a pattern of former employees providing unpaid emergency assistance. The narrative was building itself. Decision-makers had eliminated essential expertise, created predictable vulnerabilities, and were now paying multiples of their savings for inferior emergency responses. Robert Sterling, the long-serving board member, was receiving concerning reports from multiple sources. Operational efficiency metrics were declining. Client satisfaction scores were dropping. Emergency consulting costs were exceeding the eliminated payroll savings within 6 weeks. The streamlining was revealing itself as false economy. But Richard Blackstone remained committed to his narrative. In leadership meetings, he characterized the recent issues as temporary adjustment challenges and external attacks that could have happened regardless of staffing levels. He spoke of the need to stay the course and resist emotional decision-making based on short-term fluctuations. The cognitive dissonance was remarkable. A CEO witnessing the exact consequences his fired experts had predicted, while maintaining that those predictions had been fear-mongering and analysis paralysis. Late that evening, "I know I'm asking a lot," he began, "but Amanda's firm wants 3 days and $15,000 just to assess the vulnerabilities we contained last night. And there are 17 other system areas showing similar warning signs. Marcus, we can't keep providing free consulting to solve problems created by eliminating our jobs. I know, but if these systems fail catastrophically, it's not just Pinnacle that gets hurt. It's every client whose data we protect, every partner company integrated with our services, good people who trusted that we knew what we were doing." Sophia understood the ethical trap perfectly. Their expertise created moral responsibility that extended beyond employment status or corporate politics. They knew how to prevent disasters, so how could they stand aside and watch preventable harm occur? "What if we formalized it?" she said finally. "Emergency consulting contract. Market rates. Professional boundaries. If Blackstone wants expertise, he can pay for it properly." "You think he'd agree to that?" "I think he's about to discover that pride is expensive, and expertise is irreplaceable." As Sophia hung up, she realized their forced unemployment was evolving into something else entirely. They were no longer just fired employees. They were becoming the solution to problems created by their own dismissal. The question was whether Pinnacle's leadership could swallow enough pride to admit they needed help from the people they'd deemed quote, 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 quote. Outside her window, Seattle's lights twinkled in the darkness, each one representing systems and networks maintained by invisible experts whose value became apparent only when things went wrong. 6 weeks after the layoffs, Sophia was reviewing job applications at her kitchen table when her phone exploded with notifications. Marcus calling. Jake texting urgently. David sending system screenshots. Sandra forwarding news alerts. The cacophony of crisis communications she'd learned to recognize over years of emergency response. "Sophia, thank God." Marcus's voice was strained beyond exhaustion. "We're under full attack." Everything David warned about is happening simultaneously. Through her laptop, she could see the real-time disaster unfolding across Pinnacle's infrastructure. The probing activities from recent weeks had been reconnaissance for this moment, a coordinated assault exploiting every vulnerability her team had documented in their final reports. "How many systems affected?" she asked, already knowing the answer would be bad. "All of them. Authentication servers failing in cascade. Client data exposure across 17 environments. And it's happening during Grace Murphy's board presentation for the Meridian contract renewal." Sophia closed her eyes, picturing the scene. Pinnacle's largest client, representing 30% of their revenue, watching their supposedly secure systems crumble in real time during a critical business meeting. It was corporate nightmare fuel, the exact scenario her risk assessment protocols had been designed to prevent. Where's Amanda Foster? Coordinating with her emergency response team, but they're estimating 6 to 12 hours for full assessment and containment. Grace Murphy's presentation is happening now. Jake's voice joined the conference call, steady despite the circumstances. "Sophia, I'm looking at the attack vectors. This is sophisticated, but it's exploiting the exact vulnerabilities David flagged in his security audit. Someone's either incredibly lucky, or they had inside knowledge of your previous assessments." The implication hung heavy in the digital air. Either their security protocols had been leaked, or the attack was opportunistic exploitation of widely known but unaddressed vulnerabilities. Both possibilities spoke to systemic negligence. "What's Blackstone's status?" Sophia asked. "Full panic mode," Marcus replied. "He's been calling Amanda's firm every 20 minutes demanding immediate solutions. Legal department's been activated for potential data breach notifications. Jennifer Hayes is documenting everything for regulatory compliance." Through the chaos, Sophia could hear the approaching storm of consequences. Regulatory investigations. client contract cancellations, legal liability for data exposure, stock price impacts when news broke, the cascading effects of technical failure spreading through business operations like wildfire. I need to see the breach scope. David's voice cut through, analytical even in crisis. Marcus, can you grant temporary system access? I can map the damage in real time. I don't know if I have authority for that. Then find someone who does, Sophia said firmly. Because right now, expertise matters more than corporate hierarchy. Tom Bradley appeared on the call, his voice heavy with recognition of his role in the current disaster. David, I'm granting you emergency access. Whatever you need. For the next hour, Sophia's former team conducted an unpaid emergency response while Amanda Foster's expensive consultants reviewed documentation and planned approaches. The contrast was stark. Institutional knowledge versus theoretical expertise, pattern recognition versus procedural analysis. I can contain the authentication breach, but it requires shutting down client access for 4 hours minimum, David reported. The alternative is continued data exposure while we implement patches. 4 hours of downtime for our largest clients? Tom's voice cracked. During business hours? 4 hours of controlled downtime versus indefinite exposure and potential total system compromise. Jake corrected. Those are your choices. In Conference Room A, Richard Blackstone was experiencing his first encounter with consequences he couldn't spin or delegate. Grace Murphy, CEO of Meridian Industries, sat across from him with the cold expression of someone watching a business partner reveal fundamental incompetence. Mr. Blackstone. Grace's voice carried the authority of someone who'd built her own company through technical excellence. I need you to explain how a company that handles our sensitive data eliminated its entire risk management department weeks before a major security breach. Ms. Murphy, this attack could have happened regardless of staffing levels. We're implementing industry-standard emergency responses. Industry standard? Grace's laugh was sharp. Industry standard would have been maintaining the expertise necessary to prevent this situation. Your former team documented these exact vulnerabilities months ago. I've seen their reports. Blackstone's carefully constructed narrative was crumbling under the weight of informed scrutiny. Grace Murphy wasn't another board member impressed by buzzwords. She was a technical leader who understood the difference between genuine security and cost-cutting theater. We have top-tier external consultants managing the response, Blackstone tried. External consultants who are taking hours to understand what your former employees are solving in real time, Grace replied. I've been monitoring the emergency response. Your fired experts are providing unpaid assistance while your expensive contractors review documentation. Grace Murphy's voice carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to cutting through corporate nonsense. Ms. Blossom, I've been in tech for 23 years, and I've seen this pattern before. Companies eliminate expertise they don't understand, then scramble for solutions when reality hits. Sophia found herself in the surreal position of fielding a call from Pinnacle's most important client while sitting in her unemployment-funded apartment. Ms. Murphy, I appreciate your call, but I'm not sure what I can tell you that hasn't already been documented. What you can tell me is whether this was preventable and whether Pinnacle learned anything from today's disaster. Grace's tone suggested she already knew the answers. Because Meridian is making decisions about our data security partnerships, and competence matters more than cost savings. The conversation that followed lasted 2 hours and covered everything from technical architecture to corporate governance. Grace Murphy wasn't just evaluating Pinnacle's security posture. She was conducting a forensic analysis of institutional decision-making that had led to preventable disaster. Your former team prevented this exact scenario how many times? Grace asked. 17 documented incidents over the past year that could have escalated to today's scope without proper intervention, Sophia replied. Plus dozens of smaller vulnerabilities that never reached crisis threshold because we caught them early. And Blackstone characterized this as quote, overhead, and quote, 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 quote. Yes, ma'am. Grace was quiet for a moment. I'm terminating Meridian's contract with Pinnacle effective immediately, but I'm also interested in discussing a consulting arrangement with you and your former team. Companies that actually value expertise are rare, and I'd like Meridian to work with one of them. As word of Meridian's contract termination spread through Pinnacle's leadership, the financial reality of Blackstone's decisions began crystallizing. 30% of their revenue, gone. Emergency consulting costs approaching 6 figures. Potential regulatory fines for data exposure. Stock price hemorrhaging as news leaked to industry publications. Tom Bradley sat in his office, staring at cost projections that made his stomach churn. 6 weeks of savings from eliminated salaries had been wiped out by emergency response costs. The ongoing security remediation would cost 10 times the annual budget of Sophia's entire department. And they still didn't have the expertise necessary to prevent future incidents. His phone buzzed with an internal message from Jennifer Hayes. Board meeting called for tomorrow morning. Emergency session. Suggest you prepare for difficult questions about operational decisions. Meanwhile, Marcus Thompson was learning that surviving layoffs came with its own burden. He'd become the face of Pinnacle's security failures, the junior analyst whose limitations had been exposed under crisis conditions. The guilt of accepting help from fired colleagues weighed against the relief of having competent guidance available. I should resign, he told Sophia during their evening debrief call. I'm not qualified for this responsibility, and everyone knows it. Marcus, you've been set up to fail by people who didn't understand what they were dismantling, Sophia replied. That's not your fault. But you do need to decide what kind of professional you want to be going forward. Jake joined the call from his own apartment, where he'd been fielding similar inquiries from other companies affected by industry-wide security concerns. Marcus, the question isn't whether you're ready for this job, it's whether Pinnacle is ready to support someone in your position properly. The answer to that question was becoming clearer by the hour. Blackstone remained committed to his narrative of external attacks and temporary setbacks, but the board was asking pointed questions about risk management capabilities and executive decision-making. Robert Sterling, in particular, was conducting his own review of the decision to eliminate the Quality Assurance Department. Richard, Sterling said during their private conversation, I need you to help me understand how we went from having award-winning risk management protocols to experiencing our worst security breach in company history within 6 weeks. Blackstone's response was a masterclass in deflection, market conditions, sophisticated attackers, the impossibility of predicting every scenario. But Sterling had been in business long enough to recognize the difference between legitimate explanation and defensive rationalization. The attackers exploited vulnerabilities that were documented in reports we received before the layoffs, Sterling pressed. How do you reconcile that with your assessment that the risk management team was providing hypothetical value? The cognitive dissonance was becoming impossible to maintain, even for someone as committed to his narrative as Blackstone. The fired experts had predicted exactly what happened, with remarkable accuracy, using exactly the kind of analysis he'd dismissed as, quote, academic fear-mongering. As the week progressed, Sophia found herself in the unexpected position of fielding multiple job offers while watching her former employer struggle with consequences she'd tried to prevent. Grace Murphy's consulting offer was attractive, but she was also hearing from other companies that had watched Pinnacle's crisis with professional interest. The tech industry was small enough that competence had a reputation, and Sophia's team's emergency response had been noticed by people who understood its significance. Companies that had been considering similar efficiency measures were quietly reevaluating the value of in-house expertise. 3 offers this week, Sandra reported during their informal team meeting at the same Capitol Hill coffee shop where they'd spent weeks job hunting. I need you to help me understand how we went from having award-winning risk management protocols to experiencing our worst security breach in company history within 6 weeks. Blackstone's response was a masterclass in deflection, market conditions, sophisticated attackers, the impossibility of predicting every scenario. But Sterling had been in business long enough to recognize the difference between legitimate explanation and defensive rationalization. The attackers exploited vulnerabilities that were documented in reports we received before the layoffs, Sterling pressed. How do you reconcile that with your assessment that the risk management team was providing hypothetical value? The cognitive dissonance was becoming impossible to maintain, even for someone as committed to his narrative as Blackstone. The fired experts had predicted exactly what happened, with remarkable accuracy, using exactly the kind of analysis he'd dismissed as, quote, academic fearmongering. As the week progressed, Sophia found herself in the unexpected position of fielding multiple job offers while watching her former employer struggle with consequences she'd tried to prevent. Grace Murphy's consulting offer was attractive, but she was also hearing from other companies that had watched Pinnacle's crisis with professional interest. The tech industry was small enough that competence had a reputation, and Sophia's team's emergency response had been noticed by people who understood its significance. Companies that had been considering similar efficiency measures were quietly reevaluating the value of in-house expertise. 3 offers this week, Sandra reported during their informal team meeting at the same Capitol Hill coffee shop where they'd spent weeks job hunting. I need you to help me understand how we went from having award-winning risk management protocols to experiencing our worst security breach in company history within 6 weeks. Blackstone's response was a masterclass in deflection, market conditions, sophisticated attackers, the impossibility of predicting every scenario. But Sterling had been in business long enough to recognize the difference between legitimate explanation and defensive rationalization. The attackers exploited vulnerabilities that were documented in reports we received before the layoffs, Sterling pressed. How do you reconcile that with your assessment that the risk management team was providing hypothetical value? The cognitive dissonance was becoming impossible to maintain, even for someone as committed to his narrative as Blackstone. The fired experts had predicted exactly what happened, with remarkable accuracy, using exactly the kind of analysis he'd dismissed as, quote, academic fearmongering. As the week progressed, Sophia found herself in the unexpected position of fielding multiple job offers while watching her former employer struggle with consequences she'd tried to prevent. Grace Murphy's consulting offer was attractive, but she was also hearing from other companies that had watched Pinnacle's crisis with professional interest. The tech industry was small enough that competence had a reputation, and Sophia's team's emergency response had been noticed by people who understood its significance. Companies that had been considering similar efficiency measures were quietly reevaluating the value of in-house expertise. 3 offers this week, Sandra reported during their informal team meeting at the same Capitol Hill coffee shop where they'd spent weeks job hunting. Robert Sterling sat at the head of the polished table, flanked by 5 other board members whose collective experience represented decades of technology leadership. Across from them, Richard Blackstone maintained his practiced composure, despite the mounting evidence of his decision-making failures. "Richard," Sterling began, his voice carrying the controlled disappointment of someone who'd supported a CEO through previous challenges. "I need you to walk us through the timeline from the QA department elimination to last week's security breach." The presentation that followed was a masterclass in corporate cognitive dissonance. Blackstone characterized the layoffs as, quote, strategic resource optimization, the subsequent security issues as unrelated external threats, and the financial losses as, quote, temporary market corrections. His slides showed cost savings without mentioning the emergency consulting expenses that had already exceeded those savings by 300%. Board member Patricia Henley, whose background in cybersecurity made her uniquely qualified to assess the situation, interrupted midway through the presentation. "Richard, you're describing the elimination of expert personnel and the occurrence of problems those experts had specifically warned about as coincidental events. Help me understand the logic." "Patricia, correlation doesn't imply causation," Blackstone replied, deploying the kind of statistical wisdom that sounded sophisticated while missing the point entirely. "Security threats are evolving constantly. We can't attribute every challenge to staffing decisions. But we can attribute the response capacity to staffing decisions," Patricia pressed. "Your own reports show that the external consultants required 12 hours to contain a breach that former employees resolved in 3 hours of unpaid assistance. How is that not directly related to the expertise you eliminated?" The room's energy shifted as other board members began asking similarly pointed questions. The financial projections, the client retention rates, the emergency response costs, every metric told the same story of preventable institutional damage caused by executive decisions that prioritized theoretical savings over operational competence. Meanwhile, across the city, Sophia was experiencing the surreal contrast of her new professional reality. She sat in Grace Murphy's downtown office, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows that offered commanding views of Elliott Bay, discussing the kind of comprehensive risk management program that Pinnacle could have maintained for a fraction of what they were now paying for emergency consulting. "I've seen your team's documentation," Grace said, reviewing the security protocols that had been developed over years of institutional experience. "This level of systematic thinking, of preventative analysis, it's exactly what Meridian needs as we scale our operations." The consulting contract Grace offered was more than generous. It was a validation of expertise that had been dismissed as overhead. More importantly, it represented the kind of long-term thinking about risk management that allowed organizations to build sustainable security rather than react to preventable crises. "There's one condition," Grace added. "I want your team to document everything, not just for Meridian's benefit, but as a case study. The industry needs to understand the real cost of treating expertise as a commodity rather than a strategic asset." Back at Pinnacle, Tom Bradley was discovering that operational management without adequate expertise was like flying blind in increasingly turbulent skies. The systems that had run smoothly under Sophia's team's oversight were showing stress fractures that required constant attention. What had once been proactive prevention was now reactive crisis management, with all the attendant costs and uncertainties. His phone call with Amanda Foster that morning had been particularly illuminating. "Tom, I need to be honest with you. My firm specializes in emergency response and audit compliance, not ongoing system architecture management. What you need is in-house expertise that understands your specific environment." "What are you saying, Amanda?" "I'm saying that external consulting is designed to supplement internal expertise, not replace it. Your former team had institutional knowledge that can't be reconstructed through documentation review. Without that foundation, we're essentially learning your business from scratch every time you call." The financial implications were staggering. Amanda's firm charged $400 per hour for senior consultants, $250 for junior analysts. Every issue that required their attention, from routine maintenance questions to security assessments, became a budget item that added up to more than full-time salaries would have cost. By Wednesday, Sterling had seen enough. His private meeting with Blackstone was brief and decisive. "Richard, the board has lost confidence in your judgment regarding operational decisions. The QA department elimination was presented as a cost-saving measure, but it's resulted in financial losses that exceed the savings by orders of magnitude. Robert, these are growing pains from necessary organizational changes. The market will validate our efficiency measures." "The market has already rendered its judgment, Richard. We've lost our largest client, face potential regulatory sanctions, and are paying emergency consulting fees that could have funded the eliminated department for years. That's not growing pains. That's institutional damage from poor leadership." Sterling paused, studying the man he'd supported through previous challenges. "I'm recommending to the board that we begin succession planning. Effective immediately, you'll be working with an interim operations committee to stabilize current systems while we search for replacement leadership." The conversation that followed was painful but necessary. Blackstone's removal from day-to-day operations was framed as a strategic transition. But everyone understood the reality. Expertise had won over efficiency theater, competence had triumphed over cost-cutting narratives. That afternoon, Jennifer Hayes found herself in the unusual position of reaching out to employees the company had recently fired to ask for help cleaning up problems created by their dismissal. Her conversation with Sophia was carefully professional but carried undertones of institutional embarrassment. "Sophia, I know this situation is complicated, but the board has authorized me to discuss consulting arrangements that would help stabilize our current operations while we rebuild internal expertise. Jennifer, I appreciate the call, but my team has moved on to other opportunities. We're willing to discuss short-term assistance, but at professional consulting rates and with clear boundaries about scope and duration. Of course. What would you consider appropriate compensation for the expertise you'd be providing?" The number Sophia quoted was triple her former salary rate, reflecting both market standards for emergency consulting and the premium associated with cleaning up problems. created by dismissing her expertise in the first place. To her surprise, Jennifer agreed without negotiation. "The board understands that expertise has value," Jennifer said, "and that value should be reflected in how it's compensated." By Thursday, news of Blackstone's effective removal was spreading through the tech industry via the informal networks that connected professionals across companies. The story was becoming a cautionary tale about the difference between understanding business metrics and understanding business operations. Jake called Sophia that evening with updates from his new position. "My hiring manager used Pinnacle as an example in today's leadership meeting. Showed how eliminating expertise can create cascade failures that cost more to fix than the original department's cost to maintain." "How are you feeling about the consulting offer?" Sandra asked during their evening call. She'd accepted a permanent position with a healthcare technology company, but was considering short-term assistance to help with Pinnacle's transition. "Conflicted," Sophia admitted. "Part of me wants to help the people still working there who had nothing to do with the bad decisions, but part of me resents being asked to fix problems that were created by dismissing our value in the first place." David's perspective, as usual, was analytically precise. The systems don't care about corporate politics. They'll either function properly or they won't, based on the technical decisions made about maintaining them. If we can help prevent further damage while documenting the real costs of institutional negligence, maybe some good comes from a bad situation. That weekend, as Sophia reviewed the consulting contract that would bring her team back to solve problems they'd been fired for trying to prevent, she realized the story had come full circle in the most ironic way possible. Their expertise was now more valuable because it had been dismissed, their knowledge more sought after because it had been deemed unnecessary. But the real lesson wasn't about individual vindication. It was about the institutional wisdom required to recognize and value expertise before crisis made that value obvious to everyone. The companies that learned that lesson proactively would thrive. The ones that learned it reactively would pay premium prices for solutions to preventable problems. Marcus Thompson's resignation had been accepted with gratitude and regret, along with a promise that any future risk management department would be properly staffed and supported. His exit interview, conducted by Sterling himself, became part of the board's documentation of lessons learned from their efficiency experiment. "What would you recommend to companies facing similar pressures to cut expert staff?" Sterling asked. Marcus's answer was simple. "Ask the experts to predict what will happen if you eliminate their departments. Then listen to those predictions as business intelligence rather than organizational resistance. Because technical reality doesn't care about budget projections or efficiency narratives." As Seattle's weekend fog began to clear, revealing the city's familiar skyline in sharp relief, Sophia prepared for Monday's first day back at Pinnacle as an external consultant. She would be returning to solve problems in systems she'd designed, addressing vulnerabilities she'd identified, implementing protocols she'd recommended. The only difference was that now Pinnacle was paying 3 times as much for the same expertise they'd previously dismissed as unnecessary overhead. Monday morning found Sophia standing in the lobby of Pinnacle Tech Solutions, visitor badge clipped to her jacket, waiting for an escort to the same building she'd been dismissed from 8 weeks earlier. The irony was sharp enough to cut. She was now an external consultant being paid triple her former salary to solve problems she'd been fired for trying to prevent. Jennifer Hayes appeared with the practiced smile of someone managing institutional embarrassment. "Sophia, thank you for agreeing to help us through this transition. I know the circumstances are unusual." "Professional is professional," Sophia replied, though her tone carried the controlled distance of someone who'd learned hard lessons about corporate loyalty. "Where would you like us to start?" The conference room she entered held a mixture of familiar faces and new ones. Tom Bradley looked older, his confidence shaken by weeks of operational crisis. Amanda Foster sat with her expensive consultants. Their documentation piles a testament to the difference between theoretical knowledge and practical expertise. Most notably, Robert Sterling himself was present, a signal that this was no longer a mid-level management issue. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sterling began, "we're here because we need to acknowledge some hard truths. Our recent efficiency measures created vulnerabilities that have cost us significantly more than the supposed savings. We need to rebuild institutional expertise while learning from our mistakes. The presentation that followed was a stark contrast to Blackstone's earlier optimism. Sterling showed actual financial impacts: $1, $2 million in emergency consulting fees, $800,000 in lost revenue from contract cancellations, $300,000 in regulatory compliance costs, and ongoing reputation damage that was affecting new business development. Sophia, Sterling said, turning to her directly, your team predicted these exact scenarios in your final risk assessment. We dismissed those predictions as hypothetical. We were wrong, and I want to apologize publicly for that institutional failure. The apology was professional and genuine, but Sophia had learned that individual recognition didn't repair systemic problems. Mr. Sterling, I appreciate that, but apologies don't address the fundamental issue. How do you prevent similar decisions in the future? It was a pointed question that got to the heart of institutional learning. Companies could apologize for specific mistakes, but unless they understood the decision-making processes that created those mistakes, they were likely to repeat them under different circumstances. Sterling nodded. That's exactly what we need to address. We're implementing new governance protocols for any decisions that affect critical operational expertise. No more eliminating departments without technical impact assessments from the people who understand those systems. Over the next week, Sophia and her team conducted what amounted to an organizational autopsy. They documented not just the technical failures but the decision-making processes that had led to them. The patterns they identified were troubling but not unique to Pinnacle. Executive leadership had confused metrics with understanding, assuming that because they could measure costs, they understood value. They'd treated expertise as a commodity that could be easily replaced, rather than a strategic asset that required cultivation. Most critically, they'd made technical decisions based on business theories rather than operational realities. The fundamental problem, David explained during a presentation to the board, is that preventative expertise looks like overhead until you don't have it. Our security protocols, system monitoring, and risk assessment processes prevented problems that would have been visible and expensive. Without that prevention, you're essentially flying blind until something breaks catastrophically. Jake's analysis was even more direct. Military operations taught me that redundancy and expertise aren't costs. They're insurance policies. You pay for them consistently so that when crisis hits, you have response capacity rather than chaos. The consulting work itself was both professionally satisfying and emotionally complex. Sophia found herself rebuilding systems she'd originally designed, implementing protocols she'd previously recommended, training new staff on procedures her team had developed. It was good work, important work, but it felt like rebuilding a house that had been unnecessarily demolished. Tom Bradley was learning similar lessons about the difference between management and leadership. During their weekly check-ins, he was candid about his own role in the disaster. I supported the layoffs because I thought I understood the trade-offs, he admitted. I saw cost savings and efficiency metrics, but I didn't really grasp what we were losing until it was gone. Now I'm having to rebuild relationships, processes, and institutional knowledge that took years to develop. What would you do differently? Sophia asked. I'd ask better questions. Not just how much does this cost, but what happens if we don't have this capability? I'd spend more time understanding what expertise actually does rather than assuming I could evaluate it from financial reports. Amanda Foster was having her own professional reckoning. Her firm's emergency response had been competent but expensive, highlighting the difference between crisis consulting and ongoing expertise. During their transition meetings, she was surprisingly honest about the limitations of external consulting. My team can audit systems and respond to emergencies, she explained, but we can't replicate institutional knowledge or provide the kind of continuous monitoring that prevents problems in the first place. External consulting supplements internal expertise. It doesn't replace it. The financial analysis that emerged from their assessment was sobering. The 8 weeks without proper risk management had cost Pinnacle approximately $3 million in direct expenses and lost revenue. The ongoing consulting fees to rebuild basic operational security would cost another $400,000 over 6 months. Meanwhile, maintaining Sophia's full team would have cost $180,000 over the same period. More importantly, the reputation damage was ongoing. 3 additional clients had raised concerns about Pinnacle's operational stability. 2 potential contracts had been lost to competitors who marketed their comprehensive in-house expertise as a competitive advantage. The industry narrative had shifted to treat Pinnacle as a cautionary tale rather than a reliable partner. Sterling shared these findings with the board in a presentation that became a case study in institutional learning. "We attempted to optimize costs without understanding value," he concluded. "The result was operational damage that will take months to repair and trust that will take years to rebuild." By the 3rd week of consulting, patterns were emerging that extended beyond technical systems. The company's best employees were updating their resumes, concerned about working for an organization that had demonstrated such poor judgment about essential capabilities. Recruitment was becoming more difficult as word spread through professional networks about the instability. Jennifer Hayes was documenting all of this, with the meticulous care of someone building both legal protection and institutional memory. Her files were becoming a comprehensive record of how efficiency theater could destroy operational competence, how cost-cutting narratives could override technical reality. "I want future leadership to understand exactly what happened here," she told Sophia during one of their coordination meetings. "Not just the financial costs, but the human costs, the operational costs, the reputation costs. Decisions have consequences that ripple through organizations in ways that aren't always immediately visible." The most telling indicator of institutional learning came when Sterling announced the search for new leadership. The job description explicitly required demonstrated understanding of technical operations and the strategic value of expertise. Candidates were being evaluated not just on business metrics, but on their approach to managing complex systems and specialized knowledge. "We're looking for leaders who understand that in technology companies, technical expertise isn't overhead. It's core competency," Sterling explained. "The next CEO needs to know the difference between efficiency and effectiveness, between cost reduction and value creation." As the consulting contract entered its final weeks, Sophia reflected on the strange journey from dismissal to rehabilitation. Her expertise hadn't changed. What had changed was institutional recognition of its value. The market had provided correction that internal leadership had failed to provide. But individual vindication was less important than systemic learning. The question was whether Pinnacle's experience would influence other companies facing similar pressures to cut specialized staff. Whether the industry would treat this as an isolated failure or a broader warning about the risks of confusing business optimization with operational competence. Marcus Thompson had taken a position with a startup that specifically recruited him based on his experience at Pinnacle, not despite it, but because of it. His new employer wanted someone who understood both the technical requirements of risk management and the organizational dynamics that could undermine it. "They hired me to help them avoid Pinnacle-style mistakes," he told Sophia during a coffee meeting. "My experience with institutional failure has become a qualification for helping build institutional strength." As her final week at Pinnacle concluded, Sophia completed a comprehensive transition document that would serve as both operational guidance and historical record. It detailed not just technical procedures, but the decision-making processes that had led to institutional crisis and the governance changes needed to prevent recurrence. Her last meeting was with Sterling, who had shepherded the company through its most challenging period in decades. "Sophia, I want you to know that this experience has fundamentally changed how we think about expertise and leadership," he said. "We've learned that in complex organizations, the most important expertise is often the least visible, and the most expensive mistakes come from not understanding what you don't know." "What's next for Pinnacle?" she asked. "Rebuilding, not just systems and processes, but culture and values. We're looking for leadership that understands that sustained success requires investing in capabilities rather than just optimizing costs." As Sophia left Pinnacle's offices for what she expected would be the final time, she carried with her both professional satisfaction and institutional sadness. They had solved the immediate problems, rebuilt essential capabilities, and documented lessons for future leadership. But the human cost, in disrupted careers, damaged trust, and lost opportunities, could never be fully recovered. The fog was lifting from Seattle's harbor as she walked to her car, revealing the familiar skyline in sharp detail. Sometimes, she reflected, clarity came only after the storms had passed and the damage had been assessed. The question was whether organizations could learn to see clearly before crisis forced that recognition upon them. The meeting that was supposed to secure Pinnacle's largest contract was becoming a professional execution. Grace Murphy was witnessing firsthand the consequences of prioritizing short-term savings over operational competence. Back in the emergency response, Sophia was coordinating with her scattered team while watching their former workplace burn through digital channels. The professional satisfaction of being proven right was overshadowed by genuine concern for the good people still working at Pinnacle. Containment protocols implemented, David reported. Immediate bleeding stopped, but we need systematic remediation of 17 different vulnerabilities to prevent reoccurrence. Timeline? Sophia asked. With full access and proper resources? 2 weeks for comprehensive security hardening. With current staffing and consultant limitations? Unknown. Amanda Foster's voice joined the call, professional but clearly overwhelmed. We appreciate the emergency assistance, but my firm needs to maintain oversight of the remediation process for liability purposes. Your firm needs to acknowledge that they're in over their heads, Sandra said bluntly, joining from her own job interview aftermath. How many hours have you billed so far for work that Sophia's team just completed for free? Quote. The uncomfortable silence that followed was broken by Marcus. The immediate crisis is contained, but we need to address root causes. And Grace Murphy is asking to speak directly with the people who actually solved the problem. She wants to talk to us? Sophia asked. She wants to understand why Pinnacle fired the people who could have prevented this disaster and kept the people who enabled it. That evening, as Seattle's tech community buzzed with news of Pinnacle's security breach, Sophia sat in her apartment reviewing the day's events. Her former employer was facing exactly the consequences she'd predicted, at exactly the scale she'd warned about, with exactly the timeline her models had suggested. But vindication felt hollow when measured against the human cost. Marcus Thompson, overwhelmed and isolated. Tom Bradley, recognizing his complicity in preventable disaster. Jennifer Hayes, documenting failures she'd tried to prevent. Amanda Foster, struggling with challenges beyond her expertise. Her phone rang with a call from an unknown number. Ms. Blossom? This is Grace Murphy from Meridian Industries. I believe we need to have a conversation about what really happened here, and what it means for companies that actually value expertise. As Sophia accepted the call that would change everything, she realized that today's crisis was ending one story and beginning another. The question was whether the lesson would be learned by the people who needed to learn it most. Outside, Seattle's evening fog was rolling in from Puget Sound, obscuring the city's familiar landmarks and transforming the known into something uncertain and strange. Outside, Seattle's evening fog was rolling in from Puget Sound, obscuring the city's familiar landmarks and transforming the known into something uncertain and strange. 3 months after her consulting contract ended, Sophia found herself in an unexpected position, turning down job offers. The Pinnacle crisis had become a case study in tech leadership programs, her team's emergency response had been featured in industry publications, and companies were actively recruiting people who understood the real value of preventative expertise. She sat in her new office at Meridian Industries, surrounded by whiteboards covered with system architecture diagrams and risk assessment matrices. Grace Murphy had offered her something rare in corporate America, the authority to build a comprehensive risk management program from the ground up, with leadership that understood the strategic value of what she was creating. Status report? Grace asked, settling into the chair across from Sophia's desk with 2 cups of coffee, and the relaxed attention of someone who valued process over pressure. We're ahead of schedule, Sophia replied, gesturing toward the documentation that represented months of systematic thinking. Comprehensive vulnerability assessment complete, monitoring protocols implemented, staff training programs established. More importantly, we've built governance structures that prevent the kind of institutional decision-making that created Pinnacle's problems. It was satisfying work, but also sobering. Every protocol she developed was informed by lessons learned from watching preventative expertise dismissed and institutional knowledge dismantled. She was building not just security systems but organizational antibodies against the kind of thinking that confused efficiency with effectiveness. Grace reviewed the quarterly report with the careful attention of someone who understood that technical details mattered. The board was impressed with your presentation last week, particularly the section about institutional resilience versus cost optimization. The concepts aren't complex, Sophia said, but they require leadership that thinks beyond quarterly metrics. Long-term operational health requires consistent investment in capabilities that might not show immediate returns. Across town, Pinnacle was experiencing the early stages of recovery under new leadership. Patricia Henley had left the board to become interim CEO, bringing cybersecurity expertise and a deep understanding of how technical decisions affected business outcomes. Her first initiative had been rebuilding the risk management department with proper staffing and executive support. The person she'd hired to lead that effort was Jake Morrison, whose military background and Pinnacle experience made him uniquely qualified to establish protocols that balanced operational security with business efficiency. His first quarterly report had been a model of clear communication between technical expertise and executive leadership. "We're not just rebuilding systems," Jake explained during a presentation to Pinnacle's reconstituted board. "We're establishing organizational processes that ensure technical expertise informs business decisions rather than being subject to them." The financial recovery was slower but steady. Emergency consulting costs had dropped to zero. Client retention had stabilized as word spread about new leadership and operational improvements. The stock price was recovering as investors recognized that sustainable growth required operational competence, not just cost reduction. But the most significant change was cultural. Under Henley's leadership, expertise was treated as strategic asset rather than overhead expense. Technical staff were included in business planning discussions. Risk assessments informed major decisions rather than being dismissed as academic pessimism. Marcus Thompson had thrived in his new environment, where his experience with institutional failure was valued as wisdom rather than weakness. Companies that understand this distinction will outperform those that continue to confuse cost reduction with strategic improvement. As Sophia reviewed her team's quarterly achievements at Meridian, she realized that the best response to institutional failure was institutional success. They were building something sustainable, something that balanced operational excellence with business efficiency, something that demonstrated the value of treating expertise as a strategic asset. Her phone buzzed with a message from Jake. 6 months clean of preventable disasters. Team morale high. Management actually listens to technical recommendations. Who knew that respecting expertise could be so effective? The message made her smile, but also reminded her that their success was built on lessons learned from others' failures. The question was whether those lessons would persist, whether institutional memory would prevent similar mistakes, whether leadership development would include understanding of operational realities. Outside her office window, Seattle's harbor stretched toward the Olympic Mountains, clear and visible under autumn skies that promised winter storms ahead. But for now, the weather was calm, the systems were stable, and expertise was properly valued. It was, Sophia reflected, a good foundation for whatever challenges might come next. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Quote,